Item 9, call Councillor Ferguson to present.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the benefit of those members who joined us in May last year, and members of the public who may not have followed the history of this matter, I will start by giving a brief outline of the case. The 5 Links Estate Langdon was built in the early 1970s and quickly became known locally as Alcatraz on account of its stark architecture. It was also afflicted by high rates of crime, due in part to the fact that it was essentially a pedestrianised estate with car parking arranged around the perimeter. In the late 1990s, Basildon Council decided to redevelop, in 3 phases, those parts of the estate which were most problematic, especially many blocks of double-stacked maisonettes with external concrete staircases. These were mostly located at the outer edges, close to the car parking areas. They were replaced by traditional housing set in normal roads, which were, of course, given names. The retained inner parts of the estate, in phases 1 and 2, were renamed to link in with the new street names. A survey was undertaken in 2002, which, although it was claimed there were only a small number of responses, nevertheless showed 72% in favour of name changes. However, a residents' own survey in 2004 showed over 60% against the changes. There was also a petition of 107 signatories in 2009 against further changes to names, and another survey in 2011 or thereabouts in which as many as 80% were against any further name changes. By about 2009, the rebuilding of phase 3 was largely complete, with new roads and traditional housing as per phases 1 and 2. However, the retained properties were not renamed at this stage. In July 2014, Basildon Council gave notice of its intention to make an order to change the names of some, but not all, of the unredeveloped streets in the 3rd phase of the estate. At that time, UKIP requested the leader of the council to defer the implementation of the scheme so that it could be debated in full council, but this request was denied. The residents, knowing the difficulties and costs which had been experienced by their neighbours in phase 2, decided that they did not want their street names changed and started a petition. They also contacted me, their ward councillor, and I took up the issue on their behalf. On the 15th of October 2014, 422 letters of objection were lodged with the Magistrates' Court, and Basildon Council opted to fight the objections. District Judge Gareth Branston heard the case at Basildon Magistrates' Court and delivered his judgment in favour of the objectors on the 24th of April 2015. Basildon Council then decided to appeal that decision, by way of case stated, to the High Court, and a hearing before Mr Justice Garnham took place on the 12th of November 2015. The case was remitted to the lower court for a new judgment. District Judge Gareth Branston felt compelled by the High Court ruling to now find for the council, although he made it very clear in the wording of his judgment that he still felt the council was in the wrong. It is Councillor Sargent, Cabinet Member for Environment and Community, acting in the name of the council, who has led on this. In my opinion, her actions have failed to comply with Article 13 of Part 2 of the Council's Constitution, which states that all decisions of the Council will be made in accordance with the following principles. A. Proportionality. That is, the action should be proportionate to the desired outcome. B. Due consideration of all relevant factors and options, taking into account the results of any consultation undertaken and the professional advice of officers. C. Respect for human rights and equal opportunity. D. A presumption in favour of openness. And E. Clarity of aims and desired outcomes. We'll deal with the first principle, proportionality. In light of such an overwhelming level of objections to their scheme, it was unreasonable and disproportionate to pursue the matter through the Magistrates' Court. Further, having lost that case, the Council should have let the matter rest at that point. Its appeal to the High Court was even more disproportionate, and insofar as it would be unreasonable to expect ordinary residents to be able to afford to defend such an appeal constituted bullying. The second principle, due consideration of all relevant factors, etc. The Council has consistently relied on a 2002 survey in support of the name changes, but has totally ignored subsequent surveys or petitions in 2004, 2009 and 2011, which show residents strongly opposed to the changes, and has totally ignored the massive objections to the current proposal. Third principle, respect for human rights. The district judge in the first magistrates' court hearing made the point that a person's address goes to the heart of their identity. As such, it is an issue of their human rights and should only be interfered with when an overwhelming necessity can be demonstrated. This is clearly not the case here. Fourth principle, a presumption in favour of openness. The reluctance of the Cabinet member responsible, as well as other members of the administration, to engage meaningfully with the objectors showed a lack of openness and a disdain for their views. And the fifth principle, clarity of aims and desired outcomes. The Council claims to be wishing to change people's perceptions of the estate and rid it of its poor public image and undesirable reputation. Quite apart from the fact that the sobriquet Alcatraz has been neither seen nor heard for many years, not since the first phase of the regeneration, except in connection with this matter, the failure to include Mellow Purchase Close and Mellow Purchase End completely defeats this objective. This utterly lacks clarity of aims and desired outcomes. The Council pleads the need for a logical numbering system, but the fact remains that the layout of the old part of the estate, the subject of the proposed name changes, as a series of linked, offset courtyards, does not lend itself to any logical or coherent system of numbering whatsoever. Therefore, what is proposed cannot be any better than what exists, and in one particular instance, the scheme proposed is totally illogical. There is clarity of aims, but the desired outcome is impossible to achieve. The Council claims that it is easier to rename properties off an access road which leads to them, and that the changes are intended to integrate the new and existing properties. But with the exception of a very small segment of the lower numbers in Summercoats, there is nothing to link the new names with the street names of the new properties which have been constructed, or with the roads off which they are accessed. There is clarity of aims, but the desired outcome is unachievable. The Council claims that smaller areas, 16 instead of 3, will be easier to navigate. However, it is pollusively clear that the real issue is the lack of clear signage. It does not require a change to names and numbers to correct the signage, which should have been done many years ago. There is no clarity here. In pursuing its case, the Council has frequently claimed that it is in the interests of the wider community, but has utterly failed to define who this wider community is, and was unable in court to demonstrate in what way the renaming and renumbering would benefit those supposed interests. Yet at the same time they conceded that there is no benefit whatsoever to the residents affected. There is a total lack of clarity of aims here. The changes are stated to be essential to assist the emergency services and utilities. The fact that they have all managed to find their way to any given address, mostly without mishap or delay, for the past 6 or 7 years, gives the lie to this claim. The new Mellow Purchase signs, which were put up in 2014, at about the same time as the objections were lodged, was stated to be on account of an ambulance being delayed, which only goes to prove the point that it is the lack of clear signage which is at the root of the issue, a matter wherein the Council has demonstrably failed in its legal obligations, both in Phase 3 and in the earlier phases. There is no clarity of aims here. For these reasons, I have no confidence in Councillor Sargent's ability to properly fulfil the functions of the Cabinet Member for Environment and Community, and therefore recommend that the Leader of the Council removes her from this post. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. You have a second, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The motion states that this council believes in transparent and democratic decision making. So let's put that statement under the spotlight for a minute. Councillor Ferguson has quite succinctly reminded us all of the rules laid out in the council's constitution, Article 13, that governs the way in which those empowered by this council, whether it be on cabinet or on committees, should make decisions. The rules are there for a purpose, and there is an expectation by all 42 members in this room and residents that those rules be followed. It is regretful, but here we are again, challenging the way the Tories do business. I say again because this year has been particularly painful to watch, and we don't like what we said. We've had the gerrymandering of the allocation of the seats to each political party on committees following the 2015 local elections. We've had the bypassing of the planning committee on Dry Street reserved matters. The bypassing of the planning committee on Lee Chapel North reserved matters, ultimately forcing this council to remove the Tory chair from her position of empowerment. The sidestepping and abject failure of the administration in the statement of consultation on Dunton Garden suburb to provide a response to the 1,528 representations made by residents regarding their concerns about the proposal. I find it disgraceful, and I'm sure the residents
Councillor, can you stick to the motion, please?
Yeah. That despite 84% stating that they are opposed to the scheme, this council failed to have the decency to provide any formal response whatsoever to the very valid concerns raised by those 1,397 residents. How does that translate to transparent and democratic decision making? I've got a huge list here, but I'm not going to reiterate. We all know what's gone on here this year. The railroading through of the Dry Street development. Basically, again, this council witnessed and ignored the overwhelming opposition of the scheme with residents.
Councillor, stick to the motion, please.
And Chair,
You're wandering off. You're bringing other matters in which are not pertinent to this
and
issue.
democratic decision making. Thank you. This has to be the biggest travesty of all, and our residents must be applauded for their dogged determination to save Dry Street, and the Tories should hang their heads in shame. Am I surprised to see a further motion before us signalling our discontent at the way the Tories do business? No. This is not yet a dictatorship. The Five Links residents don't want their roads renamed. They don't want to shell out around £120 per household. They took their fight through the courts. People normally revert to legal help and challenge a decision when they feel a decision is unjust or not made in an open and transparent way. At what stage did the Cabinet members sit down with the residents? Or was it a case of I know best? On this occasion, I have to agree with Councillor Ferguson. The scheme should never have gone ahead, and the Cabinet member was not listening. There are no proven benefits to it. It's their neighbourhood, their street, and their homes, and they don't want a bunch of elite councillors forcing their will on them. Good luck with the scheme, as I'm sure residents will not abandon their opposition to it, and will more than likely tear any new signage down. I would have preferred that the entire issue be considered by scrutiny. We've heard a lot tonight about how scrutiny has moved forward for the better. We need to learn from any mistakes that may have been made along the way, including the fact that Council took a democratic vote on a motion which was carried in October 2014 that stated that the renaming and renumbering of properties in the Five Links estate should be withdrawn. We took a vote and it was carried.
Can you wind up, please?
I will, Chair. Ma'am. Our motion to refer the matter to scrutiny was disallowed, leaving us with no option other than to recommend the leader removes his cabinet member, who on the face of it went against the democratic will of this council and indeed the democratic will of the residents. I urge you all to support the motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Matter is now open for debate. I will call now Councillor Carol Morris.
Mr Mayor, once again we have a councillor who made flamboyant claims in order to get elected and now finds that he has failed. As a result, the councillor brings a tawdry and spiteful motion to council to try to pass blame on his fellow councillor. I liken the behaviour to that of a child who threatens that they will take the ball away when they are unable to get their own way. Motions of this sort only serve to bring the whole council into disrepute.
The councillors.
How many of us have heard people say that you're all as bad as each other? In this case, I wouldn't blame them. I have no intention of voting in favour of this appalling motion. Mr Mayor, the other day I was speaking to a member of the public who claimed that although they were not a fan of the Mayor of London, they had great respect for a recent statement he made. He admitted that the decision to introduce bendy buses to London had been a mistake on his part. What a shame that Councillor Ferguson does not have the same gravitas. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
I now call Councillor Stephen Gillier.
Well, thank you, Mr Mayor. I want to address 3 items which are about abuse. And I've got the headings here: abuse of process, abuse of power, and abuse of language. The abuse of process. I think this particular motion, as so often we have come across with the antics of the party to our left here, seems that if they get a decision they don't like, they will try and use a process, a council process, to alter that decision. And that is not the way to do business. If you've got problems, sort them out. Don't try and use process, which has disrupted this council meeting time and time again this year, to deal with it. I mean, we could spend longer discussing process, but I don't know if we want to. I think what is being put forward here is the second point, that is this abuse of power. And the subtext of this is that Councillor Sargent has abused her power as a cabinet member. And I have the judgment from Judge Garnham, who has been sent down here. And I think there's a couple of very interesting points here. Paragraph 33. And he says here, Parliament has given the Council the right to choose a name. So the choosing of a name is a right for this Council to take. Now we do that through the process of this Council, and in this particular case, it was an officer decision record in consultation with the Cabinet member. That is the right way in which we conduct the business. The other pertinent part of the judgment I felt was the one that here, has come up here this evening, as I expected it would, and that is about the motion that was voted on in Council in October 2014. And the judge here says, it is accepted, however, that that motion had no legal consequence, and in particular did not overturn the decision made by Mr Edwards and Councillor Sargent to rename the streets. In other words, in this judge's opinion, Councillor Sargent was absolutely within her right to do what she did in the renaming. I think the other issue in here is that an abuse of power. No, there has been no abuse of power. We've used the powers we've got and we've used them correctly. The bit that really has got me wound up is this idea of an abuse of language. Because we have all sorts of accusations that we're not being democratic. Well, I have a little book with me tonight. I just read what it says here about democracy, government by the people, that form of government in which the sovereign power resides in the people and is exercised either directly or by them or by officers elected by them.
Yeah, but you're a representative democracy.
There are.
Excuse me, members of the public.
sorry,
No, you're not
sorry,
allowed to
sorry.
interrupt.
So I'm not.
If I continue to do that, I'm giving you a warning now.
Oh, thank you.
It's one-sided.
So that in that particular respect, the 42 members of this council,
Don't scare me anymore.
or those that are here embodied tonight, are democratically represented to do the business. That is the way democracy works. Right?
Doesn't it?
And I think what is sad is that Councillor Ferguson in his opening comments talks about the history of it, of the renaming. He forgot to mention that the children of that estate were involved in choosing the road name back a few years now, but that was an involvement of the residents of the estate in the renaming. The other thing that Councillor Ferguson tried to allude to
Yeah, we couldn't
is
find out
that
what school.
there was a petition that didn't have any credence.
Can you wind up, please?
Petitions are not representative of the mayor. Petitions only ever give one side of the story. Right? Motion says, do we believe in democracy? Yes, we do. That's why we are here. That's how we make our decisions. I think that this motion fails, not in the sentiments it produces, but in the dialogue in which it presents to this council. It deserves to fail.
No, he won't let us.
Now call Councillor Phil Radcliffe.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. I did expect to be called earlier than others indicated, but there we are. At first we didn't have a council meeting tonight anyway, but there we go. Couple of points here. I listened interested to Councillor Ferguson's point, and I am in favour of this motion, despite the fact that he's against the way I'm standing as far as bus lanes and my ward are concerned. But having said that, let's have a look at the things, and I'll bear in mind what the Mayor was saying about sticking to the motion. I do agree with Councillor Hodge that it's part of the whole picture. But let me concentrate on not just the issue, which I think Councillor Ferguson actually explained to us in great detail what the actual issue was all about. But I want to address myself to the question of Councillor Sargent's continuation as a Cabinet member. You may well sort of take on board the points that Councillor Hillier said about abusive process and abusive power and so on. But this is symptomatic, and it was interesting to hear Councillor Morris stand up and be quite so vituperous about the comments made. When we look at her history as far as Ballard's Walk and symptomatic. Earlier on this evening, I was quite amazed. I thought to myself, perhaps there was an election coming up. You know, the leader was going on about how wonderful we're all working together on the school, and the rest of it, and the violins came out, and is it nice and Councillor Baggett? We'll wait to see what happens as far as the AGM is concerned on that issue, but there we go. Councillor Sargent, completely ignoring one task for this group, and we've heard the administration talk about tasking for this group and scrutiny, on the issue of the mental health challenge. Oh, nothing to do with us, basically, because that's where we are on that. No member to act as a champion for people who suffer from mental health and to work with the various agencies. Hold up. Professional people dealing with things like, well, organisations like Dial and like Impact. No, Councillor Sergeant.
Councillor, can you talk to the motion, please? No, you're drifting off and I want you talking to the motion.
Well, okay. I will stick to the motion. And the motion is about Councillor Sergeant being a cabinet member, and that's what I'm talking about. Because part of her failings is not just the issue with violence, it's the issue with other things where her decision making has been absolutely appalling. Therefore, I do believe that Councillor Turner should consider quite seriously the request. This council cannot remove her because her job is in the gift of the leader of the council. And if the leader of the council is totally satisfied that she's acted properly, then obviously he will want to keep her. So this is the point. I will certainly be voting in favour of the motion. I hope that other members will do likewise, and I hope the electorate, come the 5th of May, will make the right decision. Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think from bendy buses to UKIP supporting human rights, this has been a pretty weird debate, really. I don't want to take up too much time on this because I know that everybody will want to talk about the police. But when you look at this, I think what both Councillor Rackley and earlier on Councillor Allport-Hodge were alluding to here is the fact that, and taking some sort of good niceness of what Councillor Hillier was saying, that unpopular decisions on their own, are not undemocratic. We can accept that. But when it becomes a series of what many people, not just in this chamber but outside, would consider to be ill-judged, ill-thought-through, flawed policies, that is when you start to question judgment. And that is when, in the motion, it talks about having no confidence. And that's what we're being asked to vote on tonight, whether we have confidence in Councillor Sargent's decision-making abilities. I have great sympathy, not with Councillor Sargent, but with the residents of Firelinks, because there is a real element of truth in the accusation that Councillor Ferguson led those residents up the garden path. And I think that he has to be, when he sums up, when he comes back to this chamber, he has to, I think, show some contrition for some of the rhetoric that he used in the early part.
No.
But from our point of view, we look at the motion in its entirety, and again, as has been alluded to, the ignorance in which Dial and Impact were originally turfed out of this building and then was cut. That feeds into the notion of whether or not you have confidence. And my critique of the motion, Mr. Mayor, is that actually it's not strong enough because you've only majored in one area. And the points that are coming out in the contributions tonight is that when we're asked whether or not we have confidence in Councillor Sargent, there's also the issue of the hot meal service for the elderly that over the last few years she has decided to scrap as well. The failure to implement the mental health challenge and now the Firelinks estate. So when you look at it as a collective, and that is what we as councillors invariably will do, you come very quickly to the conclusion that most of us in this room, and we would estimate across this borough, have very little confidence in Councillor Sargent. And this isn't about personality, this is about politics, this is about issues, this is about judging somebody on those judgments that she has made, the political judgments that she's made, the judgments she's made about the future of virtually every single demographic in our borough. And so for that reason, we don't want to be doing this, but for that reason, given that we are being asked to vote on this tonight, we will support the motion.
Sorry, Sargent.
Thank you. It is expected that when elected, councillors should represent constituents to the best of
vulnerability. Any actions taken on behalf of residents should be considered carefully, maybe even risk assessed before implementing. And so it is for Cabinet members and officers alike. Their decisions and actions may well have a greater impact on a far bigger scale. Some actions or decisions may not suit some, possibly not all, but the general public should be confident in the decisions that have been made and often are at great deliberation, without fear or favour. Before making decisions, Cabinet members call on senior officers for advice, and if necessary, legal advice, either from within the council or externally, according to the decision being made. This is the precise course of action I took in accordance with the council constitution. Sometimes that advice and subsequent decisions are called to order. In certain cases, legal change may be made, as it was with Dale Farm, the golf course, and more recently, Fry Street, and with other council decisions over the years. In all these cases, the council has acted in good faith and in the best interests of residents. It has acted impartially and without fear or favour. And when challenged, has robustly defended those actions in the High Courts. When those courts have found it against us, we have acted accordingly, for they are the final authority.
She lies now.
It is with assurance the decision was made to rename and renumber the 533 properties on the 5 estate. We had to consider many eventualities and scenarios, including the risk of a mix-up or delay in our emergency services, finding an incorrectly named or numbered code. We recognised our duty of care, the risk of negligence and the worst case scenario of corporate manslaughter should a tragedy occur because we failed the many by appeasing the few. We recognised all of the above and took the decision to implement an action. That action was ultimately upheld by the High Court before Mr Justice Garland on the 26th of November. It is the courts that are the final arbiters, not us. And for that, Mayor, I make no apologies, and I stand by the decision I made. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
And now for Councillor Stephen Ward.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I grew up playing on the estate when I was a kid. I don't know whether anyone else here is actually from that area, but I am. You know, I've heard many comments from both sides. 530 properties, not properties, they're families, they're people. They should be listened to. I'm pleased that Councillor Ferguson is utilising that law that exists, which is the EU's law on human rights, because I can barely see that the rights of the people have been listened to. There's people here tonight from the estate, and kids may well be my mates at school. As for transparency in decisions, this decision is flawed all the way through, such as the decisions for pushing through planning, buildings, Dunton. You know, it's probably the only little piece of beautiful land that we've got. I love going running around there, and now it's going to be another building. Great, fantastic, great decision making. You speak about rights. What about the people's right to actually have it? You speak of the duty of care. All you have to do is put up better signage this way. Simple. My granny used to live on the estate, and she used to be a Liberal person, and believe Jeff Williams knew her really well. She used to live there. I used to go over there all the time. No one over there I've spoken to that I went to school supports the change of names. They don't support the change of anything over there whatsoever. This is purely bullying through, being pushed through by you. As for the leader that I'd see that's here tonight, that's Councillor Callaghan. It's the one that's come out with the best things tonight that I've seen. Oh, other than you, how about listening to people? How about listening to what they say? How about listening to the families that live there? This is absolutely ridiculous. You know, a good man that I knew, back in the 1997, Sir James Goldsmith, great line, what he said was, let the people decide. How about letting them decide? It's where they live, it's their homes, their area. Thank you.
Well, I mean, Councillor Callaghan, I think, is a hypocrite. Because he'll be the first one under fire safety, and he has before demanded action for fire safety in Fillmore's. He'll be the first one standing here if a child loses their life because the fire service can't get there. So that is why you're a hypocrite. In relation to the EU, that's another oxymoron. Basically, they say they have the right, human rights, but surely the first thing, every human being has a right to his life. And safety, fire safety.
Yes.
And that's exactly what we are doing here. And that is the judgment and sound judgment of this council. Terry Sargent and the criticism made of her judgment, that must be also then a criticism of the professional officers of this council. And I make it quite clear, this is why Councillor Ferguson, I think, has a conflict of interest, personally myself, in this matter, because he's so closely tied. If he believes that there has been unreasonableness, then he should have either advanced that at the Magistrates' Court. But the judgment of the High Court, which I've read, makes it quite clear. At the Magistrates' Court, unreasonableness, Wednesbury unreasonableness, was never argued. It was never argued that this council acted outside the scope and range of powers which it had lawfully and could exercise. It did not. And the residents never argued that, nor did their legal representative. They made it quite clear that that was never a test. So talking about proportionality, reasonableness, unreasonableness, it was never advanced, never argued at the magistrate, nor argued at the High Court. That's a red herring. In relation to the High Court, let's get it quite straight. What was argued that the district judge found in law that he started from the test, the test that the resident or the council had the burden to show that why the decision was correct. But that's the wrong test. The correct test is actually, is the decision wrong? Was it wrong? And that starting point is the Hope and Glory case. And if you look at the judgment, actually there are two cases within the judgment of Basildon that I personally led on and actually appeared on one of them at the High Court. The test is very, very clear. At the end of the day, the burden lays with the appellant, which is the residents who complained. There were 3 of them. They have to demonstrate that the council acted outside that scope of reasonableness and that power, and they couldn't demonstrate it. The High Court, the district judge acted in error. At the High Court judge found that he acted in error and directed him back in trying to answer that question. Well, the reason why I say that she acted correctly and properly with the advice and consultation of the council officers is because the district judge has found those decisions to be correct now. And also the High Court found that the district judge erred in law and asked him to redirect it. So it has gone through judicial process. This decision was correct and justified and was not overturned. The Public Health Act gives an obligation duty to this council. The council exercised that duty in reasonableness, and that was never challenged by this councillor or the residents on that basis. So, therefore, so that there is no mix-up or delay in the fire services or the emergency services coming to residents of the Links estate, and I lived on the Links estate in Brendan, so I do have personal experience of the numbering.
That was a long while ago.
When I lived there. So let's not have any. I know it would be an inconvenience. I understand that.
my name address, it would be very inconvenient. I understand the inconvenience. But what overrides that is our duty as elected members, without fear or favour, to make sure we act in the duty of the residents. And we've done that to make sure that children are safe, families are safe, their human rights are safe, to ensure that people can be served by the emergency services should a need arise. This notion about Terry Sargent's judgments and the judgment of this council is ill-founded, not correct, and should not be supported.
I now call Councillor David Shepherd, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've heard the word democracy mentioned here today. What a joke! Democracy. The party sitting here on my right wouldn't know democracy if it jumped up and bit them on the backside. Neither would their colleagues at number 10 or in the House of Commons know about democracy if it jumped up and bit them on the backside. We are all here elected members, elected by the people sat here in the public gallery and those in our borough. Elected by the people, for the people. This does not mean then that when they say to us, we do not want this decision that you are making happening in our area, in our ward, that we go and ignore them. That's not democracy. By turning around and saying to them that we don't care whether you want it or not, we are going to do it anyway. That's not democracy, that's dictatorship. Reminiscent of those, the fascists in Germany in 1936 to 45. A dictatorship.
Members, the councillor has the floor and will be heard. You may disagree, but it will be heard.
This was not just one or two people objecting. 425 people objected. And you call that democracy, ignoring 425 objections. That is not democracy. I repeat, that is a dictatorship. Now, we've heard about the emergency services, stating that this is being done to make it easier on the emergency services. But yet I have not heard one complaint or any reason for the emergency services to complain about how they can get to the estate. In fact, I've actually spoken to an ambulance crew member when my son was picked up by an ambulance at the last full council meeting because I returned home to find an ambulance outside my house. My son had had an accident. And on the way to the hospital I spoke to them. And they have said they've never had a problem finding an address on the 5 Links estate. So why are we changing the addresses? Because of the emergency services. They haven't got a problem, so why change it?
They've been working it for 50 years.
That estate has been there. As I just heard someone have said, the estate has been there for over 50 years. They've not had a problem, so why change it? I'll finish by saying that if Councillor Turner decides not to remove Councillor Sargent, then the only response from that can be taken is that he condones the actions of Councillor Sargent. And I, for one, will definitely be supporting this motion.
Well done. Well said.
Thank you.
Well done.
I call Councillor Baggett, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Before I go to the main theme, I do think that when we've seen some of the incidents around the world as a result of extremism, that the excitable Councillor Shepherd might reflect that his words were ill thought in the overall trend of what's going on in the world, and an unfortunate rant about Nazism I don't think is appropriate for this chamber. You might wish to consider that.
Shame on you.
Councillor Callaghan said
on
that
you.
Councillor Baggett has the floor. He will be heard without interruption. Thank you.
Councillor Callaghan started his speech and said that it was been a bizarre debate, and then continued that trend by educating as to why the motion should fail. Because if the motion had actually said Councillor Sargent did this, and she was naughty with this, and she was bad at this, and she was bad at that, then yeah, I think members might say, oh, there's a bit of a trend here. But that's not what the motion says. So I'm really, really curious as to whether members are going to vote with their personal
affront to Councillor Simon were actually based upon the motion. I suspect what we're going to do is get people to do the former rather than the latter. Because members have gone all over the place with their attacks on Councillor Sargent this evening, making all sorts of insubstantial and unsubstantiated accusations. And this is why I do think that this sort of motion actually just brings down the council in general. But I'm confused because Councillor Ferguson began the motion stating that the council believes in transparent and democratic decision-making processes. He then spoke at length about the process and analysed the process that had been followed and explained why he disagreed with it. So there's no lack of transparency there, surely, because he actually, in crystal clarity, explained why he disagreed with it. Again, if the motion said, I disagree with, I might have had some element of favour with it, but it doesn't. This is, as we've seen before from UKIP, it's the politics of spite. It's very easy to attack a member of the executive on any decision, but again, it presupposes that members of the executive live in their own world, make decisions without consultation with professional officers, without actually taking the appropriate advice, and just randomly roll the dice as to what decision they're going to make. And that's not the case. So unfortunately, when this sort of motion comes, it does actually call into question, because by definition, it's also saying we have no faith in the officers. And I think that is churlish on Councillor Ferguson's part as well. But this is the UKIP way. When they can't get their way, they'll either try to rewrite the Constitution or drive a coach of horses through it. We've seen this throughout this year and the year before with issues on the development of Basildon and everything else. They don't want to do anything unless it's them that thunk it. And I think that's just really sad. So this has got nothing to do with transparency, nothing to do with democracy. In fact, rather the opposite. In the UKIP's world, it's quite ironic when Councillor Shepherd was ragingly discussing these dictatorships, because in UKIP land, it's their way or no way. What they are good at, though, is being spiteful. Thank you.
I now call Councillor Kerry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a rather unfortunate situation for the residents and their corporations. Now, I spoke to Democratic Services to seek to amend this motion and was ruled yesterday that my proposed amendment was ruled unconstitutional. So if the Mayor will just very briefly give me a moment. I sought to take the bulk of Frank's motion out, and it wasn't meant as a criticism to Frank, because I think the solution is to solve. And what I seek to amend Frank's motion to say, this council believes, the rest of it removed, that an early resolution to the uncertainty surrounding the 5-link remains would be in the best interest of both the residents and Basildon Borough Council. Therefore, this council recommends that the legal of the council offers not to seek Basildon Borough Council's court costs against the 5-Links Residents Association in return to the 5-Links Residents Association agree not to go to appeal. Now, I know everybody can take the council to court for all various issues, but my thinking was this is a very unique case. There's not been a lot of case law, and it's been argued on court on very thin ice, shall we say. And all I can say, as a member of this authority, is I think the residents don't want to see a blame game, head on the chopping block, or if we was to believe some of the accusations some members have made here, that our glorious Führer would get rid of one of his generals. What would he do? Replace him with another general who would follow the policy. So it doesn't help the residents. I think because this is an exceptional court case, that the council's cost of fighting this court case is not put on the residents on condition they don't take this to appeal. And that's all I would say to the leader from through the chair, is please consider this to draw a line under it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor, are you making a formal proposal to amend the motion?
No, it was ruled out by officers, so I can't.
Call Councillor Schroeder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not intending to speak for too long, although I promise I won't do a McGowan. It's a tremendous pity, Mr. Mayor, that we find ourselves debating yet another motion like this. the kind of partisan folderol that we're seeing here is fast becoming Basildon's stock in trade. The attitude of some opposition councillors seems to be that if they're thwarted in an attempt to fulfil some daft promise they've made their electorate, they'll seek some petty measure of satisfaction by moving vindictive stuff like this. It's pretty disappointing, especially from Councillor Ferguson, who I've always found very affable. Members will be aware, and Councillor Ferguson alluded to it, that the Five Links estate has had a turbulent history since it was thrown up in the 1970s. Potty layout, brutal appearance, which earned it the unfortunate sobriquet Alcatraz. The estate has undergone extensive regeneration over the last 20 years, resulting in big improvements, but also the selective demolition of over 100 houses and flats. So it was necessary and reasonable to rename and renumber parts of the estate to rationalise that layout. Now, Councillor Ferguson's motion requires us to accept that Councillor Sargent failed to act in accordance with transparent and democratic decision-making processes. But, of course, Councillor Sargent followed this council's processes and the law to the letter. I acknowledge the motion to reverse the decision, which was passed at full council, but members will be aware motions at full council cannot overturn executive decisions. The council, through the cabinet member, is authorised under Section 18 of the Public Health Act 1925 to rename and renumber homes in the borough where deemed necessary. And, just in case there was any doubt about that, the matter was, wholly unnecessarily and at great expense, taken to court, because someone rather misguidedly told the residents that was a good idea. And it went all the way to the High Court, where Councillor Sargent was deemed to have acted correctly, lawfully, and entirely within her remit. So, sadly, not for the first time, Mr. Mayor, we're presented with a motion seeking to remove someone from post, despite having done nothing wrong, illegal, or inappropriate, having acted in accordance with both the procedures of this council and the law of the land, vindicated by no less a person than a High Court judge. And yet, we're seriously talking that we know better than a High Court judge. We're going to remove that person. We make a mockery of this place, Mr. Mayor, when we deal with stuff like this. No one could criticise Councillor Ferguson for representing his residents, nor would they dispute, as Councillor Dadd said, that those affected will be somewhat inconvenienced. And he's represented his residents. He's moved his motion, he made his point, he even eventually had his day in court. But he lost. If he thought he could reverse the decision, he was misguided. If he made promises to residents, he was foolish. That ought to be the end of it. What we have here, Mr. Mayor, is a dispiriting attempt at extrajudicial vengeance. We've had the trial. This is the retribution. It'd be indecent to remove Councillor Sargent under these circumstances, not least because she's one of the hardest working members of this chamber. I can rarely recall a meeting, briefing, training session over the last 3 years while I've been a member where Councillor Sargent hasn't been present. Indeed, I once saw Councillor Callaghan remark on Twitter that Terry would attend a meeting about a meeting. Now, I don't think he meant that entirely complimentary, but I think that's entirely what one would want from a councillor. I wish I had the time to be as diligent and as assiduous as Councillor Sargent is, but as Councillor Callaghan alluded, I have a full-time job. We are very lucky to have people like Councillor Sargent that do give up as much of their time as they do. And we'd be very wrong and perverse to sack her under these circumstances. And before I take my seat, Mr. Mayor, I would just advise Councillor Shepherd, once he's breathed in and out of a bag and calmed down a bit, to borrow Councillor Healey's dictionary and look up the difference between a representative and a delegate. We are not delegates in this place. We are representatives. We are elected to represent the best interests of the residents, and that doesn't mean...
Can you wind up, please,
I will take my seat now, Mr. Mayor. We are not always here to do what the residents want. We're here to do what's in their best interests. They may not always
Manifest interest.
Decide what's in their best interest.
I now call Councillor Phil Turner, please.
Oh,
Last speak before I
It's been an
call.
interesting debate. But I have to say, Mayor, from my own point of view, this motion is nothing less than a grubby little affair, brought together by a grubby party, hell bent on retribution. That's all it is. And it is beneath you. And do you know what? We all get tarnished with this. It's not just about Councillor Sargent. Labour, Liberal, Green, UKIP, we all get tarnished with this stuff. Because you hear them say you're all as bad as each other. But the actual facts don't bear anything like the reality. And some of the litany that's been put against Councillor Sargent, I think, is unfair. But what it does demonstrate is she's been behind some really difficult decisions. And all of those decisions are right, as far as the minority administration are concerned. Now, what we've got here is this trial, and it will be a trial by media because it will be printed in the press. This is about the track record of this estates affair coming before council. And as has already been mentioned, this is about council's process and procedures. Now, what we sought to do through the monitoring officer and the legal manager is to bottom out exactly what we were facing and get that precedent, because it does have a wider implication. It's not just about 5 links. There's a number of regeneration projects going on across the borough, and you don't want to be thwarted when you go into those. So what we've done, we tested it, and quite rightly, the residents have, under a democratic process, the opportunity to test that as well in court, and that's what happened. Now, the first court case was bizarre. None of us could quite understand how we lost that one. So, quite rightly, we put it to appeal. Because again, we hadn't bottomed it out. It was left just hanging. We take it to appeal, and we get the appeal upheld. Not only is it upheld, the judge actually goes back, not saying you got it wrong to the first judge, but actually directing him how he should be doing it in the future. Now that's the bizarre state of affairs that we saw earlier. It's unfortunate that the residents have been upset for all this, because it seemed like purely from an emotional point of view, the first judge gave it to the residents. Now what we have here is pretty much done and dusted. We know in the future exactly what we're getting into. Residents know. And I have to say, I was part of the 5 links many years ago when we started this venture. Those decisions on renaming were made back in the early 2000s. We are following that policy through because it is right to do so. We truly believe it is in the interests of residents to do that. So why, when you have all of these things piled at Councillor Sargent's door, having done the hard work and the decent thing and the difficult decision, why would you then say there's no confidence in her? If anything, you should be putting your confidence question back to the UKIPers and saying, well, what have you done? You know, if you want to take things outside of this, look at Dry Street. A promise of stopping Dry Street before they got elected. Where's that one ended up? The promise of stopping renaming. Where's that one ended up? The market, the college. You know, I could go on. Don't point the finger at this administration, any cabinet member here, who are working hard for residents. We will tell you the truth. Whether you like it or not, we maintain our integrity. Unfortunately, this grubby motion shows you that there's a lack of integrity in the leadership of the UKIP party and her followers. That's what this motion is about. It's grubby, it's seedy, tarnishes us all. We're all going to come out worse off for this. That is not the Basildon Council that I particularly want. If you can't agree with the decision, have some grace to put it aside, as Councillor Schrader said, and that will be the end of it. But not come back and fire your guns at a minority administration where you can get a headline and you might even get ahead. We're trying to do the best we can for residents. Unfortunately, we cannot please all of the residents all the time. That's what this motion boils down to. If you are in any doubt as to my support of Councillor Sargent, I'm indebted to her.
She's taken some very difficult decisions. They've been the right ones, and there'll be more to come. Thank you.
Councillor Speaker, I'm now going to call on Councillor Frank Ferguson to wind up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't quite understand the bendy buses. I didn't introduce anything. It was Councillor Sargent and others that introduced the renaming. I simply tried to defend the residents. Councillor Hilly spoke about an abuse of process. The trouble is, when he talks about democracy, is he talking about the democracy of the cabinet, or is he talking about the democracy of the council? Because the one can't overrule the other. There was a voting council, as I've already mentioned, in favour of dropping the scheme, but it went ahead nevertheless. He mentioned that it was stated in the High Court that he had a right, the council has a right to choose the name. What he failed to mention is that the residents or any person aggrieved by that decision has a right to object. And that's just as important as the right to choose. He spoke about democracy, letting the people decide. Well, the people have decided they don't want anything of it. He said that it was local school children that chose the names. We have asked the council, or at least the residents have asked the council repeatedly about that, and have got no satisfactory answers. Nobody can tell them which school children or which school.
Blue House.
Well,
they said they lost the record.
That's the first time we've heard that mentioned.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway.
Someone said Phoenix, or what one was it?
Councillor Rackley, well, I thank you for your support. I'm sorry that I disagree with you on bus lanes. I also disagree with you on grammar schools, but we'll deal with those issues later. Councillor Callaghan said that I'd led the residents up the garden path. I haven't led them anywhere. They have stated quite plainly to me that they don't want these changes. And all I've done is try and support them in that. I made no promises to them, although someone said that I had, Councillor Turner, that I'd made promises about not getting it renamed. I've made no promises to the residents at all. I have simply sought to uphold their perfectly valid right to object to the changes. Councillor Sargent and others have referred to the emergency services. But as I've made it abundantly plain, the issue with the emergency services, or anybody else trying to find their way around the estate, is signage. It doesn't matter what the names are, so long as there are signs there, the places will be found. It doesn't need, as I said, a change of name or numbers in order to assist emergency services. And the estate has managed perfectly well, even with relatively limited signage, for a whole period of time since the regeneration was completed, largely completed in 2009. That's nearly 7 years ago, and for all the years before that, the signage there has been pretty abysmal throughout its history. So that it is a signage issue. And talking about voluntary manslaughter and that sort of thing, it's just a red herring, because it's the council that are not getting on with putting the signs up, which should be there. The fire service, yeah. As to the question of the actual illegal case, I'll come on to that in a moment. Councillor Banks suggested that this criticism, or this motion against Councillor Sargent was an attack on the officers. Not an attack on the officers at all.
Could you start winding up, please, Councillor?
Yes, indeed, I will. said it's unfortunate for the residents. Well, it is unfortunate for residents. Councillor Schrader said not what they want, but what's best for them. Well, that's typical of this council. It thinks it knows what's best for the people, not what they want. It's yeah. Councillor Tillett said, is it the best interest of the residents? Well, the residents certainly don't think it's in their best interest.
Can you wind up now, please?
Yes, oh, well, that's enough. I commend the motion to the House, to the Council.
We need a vote on this, so can I have a show of hands? All those in favour of the motion, please show. All those against, please show. Abstentions, please show. The motion is lost. We will now stop for 10